Okay, I'm going to be quite quick, and it would be good if I can leave some time for questions, because I'm making a very simple argument here, and I'd like to hear reactions to it. I've rather grandly called this short presentation Coalition Building in the Age of Super-Autocracy. All right, so here's the first predicate of my argument. As the People's Republic of China has grown, both in influence and wealth, pressure on the rules-based international order has increased. I think this is fairly unarguable. There is a debate over precisely what the rules-based international order is, which we do not have time to go into here, thankfully. But there are many aspects of China's behaviour which are certainly threatening the post-war consensus and many of the international trading human rights rules that we've all become accustomed to. There are a few things here. I mean, there's a little chart there, bottom left, talking about the massive increase in state subsidies and other ways that China seeks to undercut the market. Don't propose to go into these in great detail right now. Okay, our next slide should be, if it can come up, I hope. All right, there we are. Okay, no. Okay, China's expansive territorial claims, particularly in the south and east China Seas. In fact, it won't be a surprise to any of you that tension is ramping up across the Taiwan Strait, but not just there. Around the Philippines as well, we've seen increasing infringements in what were previously known as fairly settled waters belonging to the Philippines, which is really upsetting their government. I might also just add a couple of brief points here, just in answer to two of the presentations that we've just heard. Another way that China is very successfully, it seems, and without any accountability, sidestepping international rules and sanctions is through its really shocking support for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, which it's done so blatantly, really sailing very close to the wind, and now unarguably, in my view, but also to the first presentation, it has now become impossible to win a vote against the People's Republic of China in the United Nations Human Rights Council. There are a number of reasons posited for that, but one which is very strong is the influence of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is estimated to be up to around $2 trillion worth of investment in infrastructure across the world, which in effect has the effect of buying votes at the Human Rights Council, making it impossible to hold the PRC to account. So that's the first sort of limb of the argument there. We have China's growth bringing a corresponding pressure on the rules-based international order. I then want to argue something which I'm calling the super-autocrat effect, which is stress on the rules-based international order induced by the PRC has met insufficient resistance from the international community. Now, there are loads of examples to focus on here. I'm going to start with Hong Kong. Hong Kong was supposed to be protected until 2047 with promises that were enshrined in an international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which bound both the UK and China to, uphold a high degree of autonomy and the way of life of people of Hong Kong, including a load of other attendant rights. That has not happened. In fact, what has happened is that China has unilaterally completely violated that treaty. It lies in tatters, and the UK has done, regrettably, nothing about it. Nothing about it. There has been no steps towards accountability. The closest that they came was to extend an arms embargo that already applied to China, to Hong Kong. That's what the UK thinks counts as accountability for a very clear violation of international law. By the way, the Sino-British Joint Declaration is a treaty lodged at the United Nations, so we should all be custodians for that, including Canada. Next, what has been happening in the northwest of China, in so-called Xinjiang, to the Uyghurs and other predominantly Turkic minorities. Some of the MPs seated here were involved in a parliamentary declaration of genocide. This has not seen proper accountability, in my view, from the international community. Very severe human rights abuses, which could have affected up to 3 million people. I think the phrase which is often passed around is that the extrajudicial detention of Uyghurs was so huge that it was the largest detention of an ethno-religious minority since the Second World War. That has not seen any accountability corresponding to the nature of the abuse. Next, another example. If I had to list all of these, it would take a very long time, so I'm not going to. Next, economic coercion. Australia had some extraordinarily punitive tariffs applied to it when it had the temerity to ask for an investigation into the origins of COVID. I think it was 220% on Australian wine. They weren't alone. Lithuania suffered very badly, again, over their opening of a Taiwanese representative office, and so did Taiwan, whose pineapples were banned in retaliation for I can't even remember what. But China's economic coercion has not seen the response from the international community that it should have done. We've heard about various plans. The G7 communique has repeatedly talked about them, but they've yet to materialise. And the EU's complaint at the World Trade Organization about China's economic coercion of Lithuania has just been dropped. So there are a few ways that the international community has failed to hold China to account for its pressure on the rules-based international order. I feel like I must mention COVID. Thank you. Because, we just haven't seen any accountability for what clearly was, in the early stages of COVID, a cover-up, unarguably, which did have devastating effects on the rest of the world. All right, so this is where the argument is leading. This has left a vacuum into which legislators have attempted to step. I've tried to list some international groups of legislators here which have tried to do things that their governments are not doing. So these are sort of transnational groups of legislators. We've got one that the Atlantic Council set up, Free World Commission or something like that, United for Ukraine, one on Iran, and the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, which I co-founded and run. I'm going to say a few things about IPAC here. Look, IPAC is now in 35 countries. It started with 8. It's a cross-party international initiative. There are now about 350 politicians in it from all over the world. Look, it's had quite a lot of impact. Who cares about the thing, basically? Who cares? What can it achieve? It's not governments. It can achieve some stuff. I'm going to quickly run you through a brief slide of impact here. It can change the law. It has done, and at least 10 times. This is a collection of something that the co-chairs have done on China here, parliamentary interventions. These are proper parliamentary interventions. 1,062, I think, was the number there since 2020. And yes, about a third of them were Garnet Jenis MP. A large number of bills and amendments tabled, which I think largely belong to Marco Rubio there. But otherwise, you can see, these things can have a framing effect, and they can try to push their governments into a better position so that the rules-based international order, however you might like to define it, can be protected. I've got a couple of minutes, I think, for questions. I'll open the floor. Thank you. Yes.
Years we did conferences together. There was a global, consensus amongst people that you and others here in this room have met with that we need to partner in a much more coordinated way to combat some of the issues that you're talking about here. How do you see this alliance, which, as Ben and I have paraphrased it as the United Front for Freedom and Democracy, where do you see us going, and how do we get more traction here in Canada, which, quite frankly, it's, the government's done a great job, but there are a few other leaders here in this country that are taking up the mantle as they should.
So a couple of limbs in answer to your question. First of all, it has to always be above party politics, and that's extraordinarily difficult here at the moment, I think, particularly with the inquiry into foreign interference ongoing. Very important that whatever's done maintains very, very clear bipartisan alliance, wherever it is, and international, because this challenge is beyond party politics and beyond geography. The other thing is that, frankly, you just have to try to find ways of incentivizing political activity in order to ensure that people keep pushing this down the road. MPs have got thousands of things to worry about. Why should they concentrate on China unless, to some degree, it's in their interests? So you have to use the media. You have to try to use whatever you can in order to amplify that message and incentivize that message so that people keep working on it. A couple of things to say there. Do I have time for one more? No.